الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان.
Assalamu alaikum, my friends. Welcome to Revelation Kids. Today we are doing Qur'an Year 4, Going Public. Sometimes they'll make you feel small. At least that's what they're trying to do. The people who don't understand, the people who are afraid of change, the people who would rather laugh than listen. They'll try to shrink you, make you doubt yourself, make you wonder if you really should have stayed quiet. But here's the thing about being small. Sometimes the smallest voice in the room is the one that changes everything. That's what we're going to learn about in Qur'an Year 4. For the past 3 years, the Prophet, peace upon him, had kept his message pretty private. A small circle, his family, a few trusted friends, hidden prayers in hidden places. But Allah's message was never meant to whisper forever. A new revelation had come down, and it was clear and direct. Warn your nearest relatives and lower your wing of kindness to the believers who follow you. This was Allah telling the Prophet that it was time. It was time to go public with the message. No more secrecy, no more hiding. The Prophet had to stand up in front of his own family, the elders and the uncles, the chiefs of his clan, and tell them the truth. Imagine how that must have felt. He wasn't speaking to strangers. These were not his enemies. This was his own extended family, the people whose approval mattered the most to him. So the Prophet invited 45 men from the clans of Hashim and Muttalib to a feast. These were his closest family members. He prepared food for them and welcomed them to the gathering. But before he could even begin to speak, his uncle Abu Lahab, he stood up and he scattered the crowd. He knew what his nephew was up to, and he said, "Don't listen to him." Abu Lahab warned, "This message that he's about to tell us is bad for all of us." And so the guests departed. Imagine that. You prepare a meal, you gather your courage together to send the invite out, you're ready to share the most important thing in your life, and before you can even open your mouth, someone shuts you down. See, most people would have stopped there, but not the Prophet, peace upon him. He was given courage by Allah. The very next night, he invited everyone together again, and again Abu Lahab tried to disrupt the crowd. On the third night, the Prophet didn't wait. As soon as the food was served, he stood up and he spoke, and before anyone could silence him, he made an announcement. He looked around the room, at the faces of uncles who had held him as a child, cousins he had played with in the streets of Mecca, elders who had watched him grow from an orphan boy into a trusted young man. These were not strangers. These are the people who knew him best. And then he said, "I celebrate Allah's praise. I seek His help. I believe in Him. I put my trust in Him. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, with no partners. A guide can never lie to his people." The room went quiet. 45 men, elders, leaders, chiefs, staring at this man that they had known for his whole life, wondering where this was going. And then the Prophet told them. He told them about the angel, about the cave, about the words. He told them that Allah had sent him as a messenger to the people of Quraysh, to the Meccans, to their children, and to all of mankind. He told them that just as surely as they sleep and wake, one day they would stand before Allah and be asked about how they lived their lives. The silence was heavy. Some men shifted uncomfortably. Others looked at the ground. A few may have exchanged glances, but no one spoke. No one until one voice broke through the silence. It wasn't an elder. It wasn't a chief or a wealthy merchant. No, it was Ali. A 13-year-old boy, a boy surrounded by grown men, and he stood up and he said, "I will support you." Think about that for a moment. A room full of powerful men going silent, and a 13-year-old boy was the brave enough to speak? Some of the elders laughed. They actually laughed. A child supporting a prophet? They thought it was ridiculous. But Ali didn't sit down. He didn't look away. He stood there proud, confident, small in that room full of giants, and he meant every word of it. And the prophet looked at Ali with gratitude. Because sometimes self-worth doesn't come from being the biggest, the oldest, or the loudest. It comes from being the one who is willing to stand when everyone else stayed seated. Now, to be sure, there was one uncle who didn't laugh. That was Abu Talib. Abu Talib had raised the Prophet, peace be upon him, since he was a little boy. He took over the Prophet's care after the Prophet's grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, had passed away. Abu Talib had loved him like his own son, and even though Abu Talib did not embrace Islam himself, he could see the truth in his nephew's eyes. He could feel his nephew's conviction. The leaders of Quraysh came to Abu Talib and pressured him. They pressured him really hard. They said to him, "Your nephew, he's insulted our gods, mocked our way of life, called our traditions foolish. Stop him, or let us deal with him ourselves." But Abu Talib was torn. He loved his nephew, but the pressure from his tribe was crushing. So he went to the Prophet, and with pain in his voice, he said, "O my nephew, spare me and yourself. Do not put a burden on me greater than I can bear." The Prophet's eyes must have filled with tears. This was the man who had protected him his entire life, and now even he was asking the Prophet to stop. "O my uncle, by Allah, if they put the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left, on condition that I abandon this mission, I would not abandon it until Allah has made me victorious or I perish." Then he turned and he walked away. Abu Talib saw how convinced his nephew was of his calling, and he called after him, "Go and preach what you please. By Allah, I will never give up on you." That right there is honor. Abu Talib was protecting the Prophet, not necessarily because he agreed with everything he said, but because he believed in who Muhammad was trying to be. Now, with Abu Talib's protection behind him, the Prophet, peace be upon him, climbed Mount Safa, a hill in the center of Mecca, just outside of the Kaaba. This is where all important announcements were made in the city. He climbed the mountain and he called out to the tribes of Quraysh by name, the tribes of Harith and Nawfal and Abd Shams and Makhzum and so many other names. One by one, each clan was named until a crowd had gathered below him, curious about what this announcement was and why it was so urgent. When the crowd had gathered, the Prophet asked them a simple question. "If I told you that an army was approaching from the other side of this hill, would you believe me?" The Prophet was testing them because they answered without hesitation, "Yes, of course, because we have never known you, Muhammad, to have ever told a lie." Think about that. Even his enemies, even the people who wanted him to stop, could not deny that the Prophet was the most honest man in the city. They had known the Prophet for 40 years, and not once had he been caught in a lie. Not once did he treat someone poorly or try to cheat or steal anybody. He was known as Al-Amin, the trustworthy. So after the Prophet asked them this question of whether they would believe if there was an army approaching on the other side of the hill, and after they all said yes, the Prophet then said, "Then I am a warner to you before a severe punishment." The crowd immediately erupted. Abu Lahab grabbed a handful of sand and threw it at the Prophet, shouting, "You gathered us here just for this? May you be destroyed." And then the laughter came. The insults came. The people who had just called him trustworthy were now calling him crazy. That's what it means to try to make someone feel small. Not strangers, but your own people making fun of you. The people who know you're honest but aren't ready to hear what you have to say, they're the ones who will call you crazy. And yet, even as the dust settled and the crowd walked away shaking their heads, Allah did not leave His Prophet alone. Allah al-Kabir, the Great, as He is also known, was watching the entire time. The Qur'an came down with words of comfort, reminding the Prophet that this was not the first time a prophet had been ridiculed. The verse says, "The wicked used to laugh at those who believed. They winked at each other whenever they passed by. But on that day, it will be the believers who will laugh at the faithless." Surahs were starting to come to the Prophet, peace upon him, telling him about the stories of the prophets who came before. Every prophet before Prophet Muhammad walked this exact same road. Musa was made fun of. Nuh was laughed at for building a boat far away from the ocean. Ibrahim a.s. was even rejected by his own father. Every single one of them was made to feel small, and every single one of them was proven to be right in the end. Because perseverance isn't about being big enough that no one can hurt you. It's about being strong enough to keep going even when they do. And confidence, real confidence, doesn't come from the approval of the crowd. It comes from knowing that the one who created you, Allah al-Kabir, the Great One, the one who created you, is there with you every step of the way, watching over your journey. This is Qur'an year 4. Qur'an year 4 is the public year. If you remember, the first 3 years were the private years. So Qur'an year 1 was private, Qur'an year 2 was private, Qur'an year 3 was private. Qur'an year 4 is the public year. And I'm going to start teaching you guys mnemonics to memorize this. So the first mnemonic in the Qur'an year timeline is, imagine a rocket ship getting launched up into space. Before you launch anything, you go 1, 2, 3, blast off. And it's in the same way with the Qur'an year timeline. 1, 2, 3 is the countdown before the public blast off. So we have Qur'an year 1 is private, Qur'an year 2 is a private year, Qur'an year 3 is a private year, and then Qur'an year 4 is the first public year of the message. This is the year that the Prophet stood before his family and told him the truth. He told everyone in Mecca that he was a messenger sent by Allah. This is the year that Abu Lahab threw sand in his face, and the elders started laughing at him and at Ali, the 13-year-old, who stood up for the Prophet, who had more courage than any other man in Mecca. This is the year that Abu Talib said he would make a promise that he would keep for the rest of his life to protect the Prophet, peace upon him. This is the year they tried to make the Prophet feel small. They tried, they laughed, and they mocked. They threw sand in his face. But the Prophet didn't shrink. He felt it, and it hurt him. Ali didn't sit down. He remained standing for the Prophet, peace be upon him. Because when Allah is with you, no one, no matter how loud they are, can make you smaller than you really are. But the laughter is about to turn to something worse in Qur'an year 5. Because when mocking doesn't work, the enemies of truth turn to something darker. Tomorrow night, we'll hear what happened when the people of Makkah stopped laughing and started hurting some of the believers. Qur'an year 5. Remember, this was already written.
إن الذين قالوا ربنا الله ثم استقاموا فلا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون أولئك أصحاب الجنة خالدين فيها جزاء بما كانوا يعملون.